Well, good morning, everybody. It's Jon Tweed, as you can see. Well, you've got me on video, so sorry about that, and you haven't got my my good-looking panel. Thanks very much for joining us. You'll have the audio for everybody, so we'll be able to. I think we'll be able to get the main gist of this. I think that's important. If we can get the video going as we go through the session, that'll be fantastic. So. The penultimate session for our latest webinar program. So we thought today, there's been a lot going on in the industry, as we're all aware, and very tough times, but there's also a lot of good stuff going on with solicitors, lenders, and you know, we are starting to move forward. The good news was, so the physical valuations, which for me, I thought has come quicker than I expected. So that's some good news. So I think what we want to do, as you say, I think for all of you who followed these sessions, my name is Jon Tweed, I'm working with AdviseWise. What I want to do is introduce our panel today. And we've had some questions already from a lot of you, so thank you very much, and we'll be running through those. If there's any questions as you go along, please do put them on the web chat. And what I'll do, I'll be able to ask those at the end. So here we go. So let me introduce, first of all, Mr. Chris Flowers. Chris, are you there?
Yep, just unmuting myself. Sorry there, Jon.
Excellent. So Chris is, a lot of you will know Chris. He's quite high profile in the industry, head of intermediary sales at Pure Retirement, does a fair bit of work with the funding side as well. So I'm sure there's a lot Chris will have to say today about some of those questions. Chris Brown is head of intermediary or head of distribution at One Family. I think that's the right title, Chris. You're head of distribution now?
It is, Jon.
Right,
yeah.
fantastic.
Good morning, everybody.
So Chris has been running the distribution for a couple of years. So and previous to that, Chris, you were involved a lot in platform and technical side. So again, be interested to perhaps get some of your views on that as we move along.
Indeed, yep.
My third panelist, Peter Barton. Peter, welcome. Peter's done a few sessions for us and some very good sessions. So good to have you back on board on the panel, Peter. And Peter, as most of you will know, is head of equity release at Ashfords.
Thanks, Jon.
Good to have you on board.
Thank you.
Mr. Simon Chalk. Simon, industry figure, commentator, managing director of Laterliving, now a specialist advisory company in the later life space. And Simon, you've worked closely with Solar. You're on the advisory board there, I believe. So Solar, Society of Later Life Advisors. So great to have your expertise on the advisory side, Simon. So that's the panel, everybody. So welcome. And I think what we'll do is move on to the first question. So I think, Chris, if you wouldn't mind helping us with this one. It's a panel question, but if I start with Chris, do you think there'll be a shift in any of the types of lifetime mortgage funders attracted to the market now? Is this current environment going to change who gets involved going forward, and perhaps even the ones involved now? You know, will it still be an attractive asset class?
Which Chris are you asking, Jon?
Chris Flowers.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, really good question. And I think when the coronavirus first kicked in, there was a lot of uncertainty around what funders, what lenders were going to do. I think there was a lot of concern regarding actually what would happen to the housing market, the property. And I think that's why it took us a couple of weeks, but we still got there quickly. It took a couple of weeks for most lenders to get out with a proposition, simply because there was a lot of concerns what was going to happen to the property market. As we've seen it reopen and the funders have got more comfortable with what's going on, I can only really speak on behalf of the funder connections that we have, but all of our funders have absolutely said categorically they are still 100% committed to this market, mainly because they need lifetime mortgages as the asset class. So that demand hasn't gone away. I think the only caution that we'll see from a funder point of view as we move out and through this period is just really as looking at the value of properties. So I think where we will see a potential hit in the short term is maybe the removal of some of the higher LTV products. where the risk of the no-neg kicks in. But I would say other than that, that all our funders are still 100% committed to this marketplace, and any new partnerships that we're looking at are certainly going ahead at some speed, but may just be that bit longer to launch due to what's happened.
So from your viewpoint, Chris, that's great, thank you. So from your viewpoint, this is still seen as an attractive asset, you know, to sort of get involved in the equity release lifetime mortgage funding.
Absolutely. You know, a lot of these funders, you know, they do have other assets that obviously that they do deal in. So for the funders, the equity release is just one part of the bigger portfolio. So yeah, they don't take short-term views. You know, it's a long-term business decision they've made to go into this market, and that hasn't changed. As I say, the only change is their appetite for risk and how that might change as we navigate through this difficult period. Yeah.
And Chris Brown, on the lender side as well, anything you'd like to add on the funding side, Chris? You know,
I think, yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, I think I echo what Chris has said, really. You know, there's still an appetite out there for our funders as well to stay in this market, and also some non-traditional funders that we're having discussions with as well that are looking to move into it. So I think from a longer term perspective, I still think it's seen as a really key asset. And I think, you know, once we get through all of COVID, you know, we finalise some of the discussions with our sort of non-traditional ones, there might be a shift in some of the different types of products available. But it's a question of these are longer term discussions.
So overall, then it seems that overall that seems positive. It's you know, potentially a slight stumbling block from the viewpoint of timescales. Maybe is that what we'd agree on? But you know, there's still a lot of work going on, and as we know, you know, and be involved in funding. And Chris Flowers, you're close to it. You know, it does take some time. So okay, well that is good that there's still positive discussions going on. Keeping on the vein of positivity, because I think, you know, we've talked in some of the previous webinars that, you know, I do think lifetime mortgages, and I think it's been agreed that lifetime mortgages are going to play an important part going forward, you know, or a more important part, because it's an important part now, but an important part in holistic financial planning. And I think that is the involvement of a bigger advisory class, including wealth managers, etc. So if we agree there's a pent-up demand, and you know, and that's partly this, something like 65,000, if you talk about 65,000 surveys waiting to be carried out, evaluations waiting to be carried out. If we talk specifically on the lifetime mortgage market, and Chris Brown, I'll ask you again, but please feel free, panelists, to join in. How's the sector going to cope with that? You know, and I suppose there's a couple of things I'd like to know from the viewpoint of a lender viewpoint, but I suppose also, Simon, you may wish to add in, is on the advisory viewpoint as demand increases.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, I think the next few months really going to be a little bit of a challenge for most lenders as they sort of work through the backlog of valuations, and obviously the delays in processing, which obviously is no criticism of lenders or valuers. It's just purely down to circumstances we find ourselves in. And also furloughing of valuers, you know, we're aware that a number of the valuation firms have furloughed their valuers, so they're all having to come back into work to actually play catch up effectively. I mean, most lenders will be prioritising those that have moved towards on-site valuations, because I know there's sort of pent-up demand for those on-site vals. But I think it's going to be a very busy and it's going to be a very interesting time. I think those companies that I suppose use technology to sort of increase their efficiency in the process, and they'll be the first that will sort of take the steps forward and be in a good position to deal with this demand that comes through. I think, you know, most lenders will be looking at their targets for the year, revisiting those, making a decision as to whether they want to, you know, discuss with funders about price changes, criteria changes, which, you know, will hopefully stimulate the market even more. And I think the market was in a really good place up until COVID-19. Which, you know, if lenders do come out with, you know, really attractive rates, and I know there's some hovering around at the moment at circa 2.5%, I think it's great news for clients, it's great news for advisors, and whilst it's been a bit of a challenge these last couple of months, I do think that we will see a really busy remainder of the year. So I'm quite positive and quite bullish about how we see 2020 panning out.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, just staying on the advice side there. And Simon, you may wish to step in, but again, I think this is for everybody. We've had a change in the way, and as advisors, changed the way we're advising, so remote advice. I suppose, what's the experience of that, Simon? You'll be able to help with that. But also, is it here to stay? You know, or is it something, is it for now, or will we go back? The customers will prefer the face-to-face advice, and advisors preferring face-to-face advice.
Okay, thank you, John, and hello, everybody. Two parts to that, I suppose. One is the historical experience of equity release customers in terms of where they prefer to receive their advice and how they prefer to receive advice. And it's well known now over many years that there's room in the market, and always has been really, certainly the last 10 years, for people to have the choice between a home visit, an office visit, or keeping it at a distance and doing remotely using mainly telephony. But now, in the last 2 months, using more and more video links. We're a small advisory firm, so we're not the barometer for the whole sector, but certainly we've seen an increased appetite for customers to deal using WhatsApp, using FaceTime, and we've hit and miss trying to use Zoom. We've not bothered with any other platform so far, but it seems to be working pretty well. And as an advisor, what I've found, I've had to learn new skills at my time of life, which isn't great, but by having improved technology with cameras, speakers, having 2 screens involved enables you to screen share and go through a document at the same pace and time with the client. And if the broadband connection's good, my anecdotal experience so far is it actually works jolly well. It actually works jolly well. So I think that will encourage people like me who are a bit of a stick in the mud and long in the tooth and don't like to see too many changes going on, to be perfectly frank. It will encourage us to think, no, I've got another 10 years left in me yet. And I think the younger brethren in the 20s and 30s, well, it's second nature. My kids set up half my gear. So there'll be no difficulty there. But then that leaves us with ultimately the most important element in this, and that's our client. How do they think? How do they feel? So there are certainly those who reject technology, maybe in their 80s. I'm obviously generalizing. We have many people emailing us in their 80s, but a lot of them will reject that sort of technology. They're not comfortable with it. They're not au fait with it. So they would prefer a home visit. But the difficulty we're now faced with is that even post-lockdown being lifted in our world, whenever that may be, it's clearly going to be done under very safe protocols. If you've seen the recent advice guidelines issued to surveyors and other categories through the government, saw something from eServe yesterday, you can imagine that trying to go into a client's home in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and if some scientists are led to believe this could be, the virus doesn't truly disappear, are you really going to turn up to a client's home with PPE, gloves, masks, and sit in there? I think if you're going to do that, beyond the end of a phone where they can at least see a smiling face, because one of the principal reasons that customers choose face-to-face advice is they want to see a face that they feel they can trust and they're comfortable with and they can talk to. So going forward, I think there'll be a heck of a shift towards doing this sort of thing and it becoming the de facto choice for many people.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Simon. Very succinct answer. Okay, just staying on the, and this is probably to the lenders, the 2 Chris's, remote valuations. So we've seen we moved to remote. There was a reaction that we had to for the circumstance. We've now we've now gone back to physicals are allowed again, but well, in England as opposed to the periphery, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Are we here, are remotes here to stay ongoing long term?
Jon Tweed, okay, I'll pick that up. Firstly, can I just go back to the last question you asked in terms of potential issues regarding our market and coming through this? I really think the way I see the market at the minute is that it's been tough for broker firms, especially the firms where you're running an employed workforce where you're relying on, you know, what you spend your money on, you want coming out the other end in terms of completions. A lot of firms, you know, aren't seeing those completions come through at the pace that they want. So I think that there will be, you know, it is a tough time for a lot of companies, and we're seeing that, you know, across the board. That means we're going to have to adapt. And I do think, on a positive note, that represents massive opportunities. I think there is, in my eyes, there'd be a concern: do we have enough advisors out there to be able to deal with this demand? Only time would tell, but I would say that, you know, the upwards of the 70 people that are on this call today, you know, you're on it because you've got an interest in this marketplace. And absolutely, my plea to you would be to all absolutely grasp the opportunities that come your way in the coming weeks, months, and towards the end of the year. Because I firmly do believe that with the right technology, with the right pace of being able to deliver things and understanding what your clients want, there's some great rewards out there for clients and for brokers. Touching upon the great rewards for clients, a little plug towards Pure. A little heads up for everyone on the call. We'll be announcing a rate cut on our sovereign range later today, with an effect tomorrow, which I believe is the lowest ever fixed rate in this marketplace. So that's twice in the last couple of weeks that we've actually been able to lean with a headline rate that's the lowest we've ever seen. So it's a fixed rate of 2.44.
Wow.
So, you know, the messaging out there to the clients is when it's safe to do so, and when your clients are able to do it, the rewards can be rich if you do get it right. But as I say, it's a case of, if all firms can survive, you know, whatever size they are, if you can come back better for this, I think the rewards will be great. In terms of your question, John, because I went off slight tangent
that's
there.
fine, Chris.
In terms of the valuations, let's be honest, that the remote valuations, they were there to get us out of a hole. In terms of, it's not suitable for everyone. We're probably seeing across the board that maybe 50% of all cases can go down that route. And I think whilst we're going through these difficult times, they'll always be there to be able to offer solution. But I think the best comfort that a lender will ever have is able to do that physical valuation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. So, and that's moving on then, Peter. And there we are. It's good to see Peter now. We've all got Peter on video. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that, Peter. You're not doing a dance in the background.
Not at all. I'd never do that.
So, Pete, over to you. Now, we've talked, and those of you who've been with us, we've done sessions previously talking about, it was a very interesting session, Pete, on the legal side. So, just probably tying that up, and Chris, thanks very much for those answers. They were excellent. Do you think we need to do more and change? Do we think we need to change the legal process? Because it's been talked about the Equities Council, and so I've probably got two questions here. One will be for the whole panel. So from the Equities Council viewpoint, obviously it's meant to be short term, and I totally understand that because it's part of the, you know, the standards. Do you think that will change going forward, or do you think that will, you know, do you think will improve the way we work with customers, or change the way, I should say, improves a bit leading, particularly on the legal side from your viewpoint?
I mean, from our perspective, when it was introduced, Chris Pond and Jim Boyd made it incredible. They couldn't have made it any clearer that it was only ever going to be temporary.
Mm-hmm.
As I said a few sessions ago, it was only ever introduced to help probably the smaller solicitor firms that were struggling because they didn't have the travelling solicitor team that we have. And at the time, we all pointed out, there was obviously now a legal panel of the Equity Release Council, we all pointed out that actually the smaller firms processing equity release cases that don't have the travelling solicitor teams are the ones that have largely had to close down. So even if they could proceed with the non-legal face-to-face, they then weren't getting into the office to process the original documents. That said, we had a meeting yesterday with the Release Council, the legal panel, and it was very much suggested there that there will soon be a return to legal face-to-face only, because obviously sort of my colleagues in other firms have all continued to operate the face-to-face meetings with the lawyers, which I think for the whole of the market, and certainly for the lenders, I'd like to think so, and the financial advisors, has been that reassurance that we have been the only ones in the whole process still seeing the clients face to face, albeit through a mask, which we know clients have appreciated. When we've actually spoken to clients, they've not wanted to have an independent witness going around to the property anyway. I think the council are incredibly concerned that they do not want to revert back to that pre-2014 position. I've sounded out with the likes of Optima and Enact and Eversheds as to how they found it. They've had a tiny percentage of cases only coming through on the non-legal face-to-face, and I think from what they were all saying to me, and including Optima yesterday, said to me that they're looking forward to a return to the legal face-to-face. I think leaves them with a bit of uncertainty that the procedures have been followed correctly, because as I said, it tends to be those small firms that make hard work of cases anyway. So, yeah, in my opinion, should there be the option for the non-legal face-to-face, I am very much on the camp of you need to have that legal face-to-face. I know I'm bound to say that, but actually my job would probably be easier if we did the independent witnessing route. I'd probably make more money, but I think for the sector, and this is what we were saying at the council meeting, was for such a short window of time, and I plan to be in the sector for another 20 years. I don't want to look back in 10 years' time thinking for that 6-week period we slipped up. Some things that I do think we will keep. Certainly, many of the lenders have adopted electronic signature. So thanks to Chris and to Chris for allowing that with your solicitors. That's been a great help in the process. And I don't see why that shouldn't continue. The only thing that we've not got past is the sending off original documentation to lenders, solicitors. So my team and some of my colleagues' teams have still been going into the office to find the lockdown, original documents. I've had conversations in the past with lenders, solicitors, and from their perspective, there was no block to completing a case on copy documents as long as we give the necessary undertakings. It's really been the funders behind the scenes that have prevented that. But I think that's one thing that was highlighted to us, is the land registry don't insist on original documents. They're happy with certified copies. So going forward into the future, I'd like to think that we could go forward to completions on copy documents with originals to follow if needs be. So from our perspective, I think we need to go back to legal face-to-face because it does provide the holy grail of service, but I think there are certain elements that we can take forward and indeed go even further.
Okay. Just coming back, thanks Peter, just coming back on a question Chris Flowers raised. Chris, you mentioned about, and this was regarding the pent-up demand. Is there more as an industry we should be doing to attract, if there is this pent-up demand, there's going to be issues, and I say it's fantastic. We've got so many advisors with us today, and we have done every week. So there's an interest. Do we, as or does an industry, we need to do more? And if so, does the Equities Council need to do more, or other trade bodies to be banging the drum more, or getting more advisors involved in this market? And that's to all of you. Anybody, please help us with that one.
I'm happy to take that on. I think, can we be doing more? Absolutely, but I suppose it's a long line of things at the moment that probably take priority. But the future of the advice, has to come from a new breed of advisor coming through. And I think that there's a lot of good work that AdviceWise do. There's a lot of good work that all the other clubs. So I will mention, that the work that Air do, the work that they've done for the last 10 years, the work that Perk have done of helping educating this marketplace. I think that since AdviceWise has come in, that they've taken it down a slightly different way, and it's a technology way, and I think that's a breath of fresh air, and probably one way in which we will open up a new market to the people that are really au fait with technology. But in terms of that, I think it really, I think what would really push it forward is if we saw some more high street brands come into this marketplace. But I think, unfortunately, and this hasn't changed in probably the time you've been here, John, is no one goes to university and says, I want to be an equity release advisor.
No, absolutely.
And that's a bit, and then a lot of people also say, and this may well change, is that generally your financial advisor is generally anything up to 5 years in a similar age bracket. So, you know, we are fishing in a pool of, let's say, the relatively older people. But I think, you know, a lot of the top specialist firms out there, most of them have got their own training academies, but we can't rely on those big firms, you know, to help pump this marketplace. You know, I think where we had been seeing the significant growth in this marketplace over the last couple of years was the smaller broker. So the one-man bands, the specialists, that's where we had really seen that growth, and the dominance moving away from the top bigger firms, because, you know, there's a lot more smaller brokers taking interest in this marketplace, and it's really been driven by consumer demand. And probably Simon's probably a good place to come in there to see, you know, the story that he's been on and how the market's changed, and see he entered in well over 10 years ago.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you for the introduction there, Chris. Well, when I was a lad, as they say, I started out with going on e-money facts, printing out pages of products using highlighter pen.
I remember those.
And then thinking, what should go in a report? What should it look like? Because there wasn't any rules, there wasn't any guidance. That's how long ago it was. Roll forward to the modern time, and the amount of help, the wealth of knowledge that's shared out there is absolutely phenomenal. And I think our sector needs to be applauded for that. Lots of people here today involved, taught me many things quite a few years ago. So very good to see you all still here. So if you were to come in the market today and you were coming in with some sense of intrepidation, then I think you've got a huge amount of help. There's so many people who can help you, so many resources like AdviseWise, literally they're on the click of a button in many ways. Now that's great. I have some concerns, and I think we need to be a little bit cautious. And that is that in difficult times like this, there can be a bit of a mentality to rush into new areas. And if you go back to when we had the last credit crunch and things were really tough for everybody, myself included, I even flirted with the notion of doing probate for people's estates and went on a training course. I went on the dreaded utility warehouse, half a day training course. I even looked at debt collection with mate, who was obviously a lot bigger than me. So all these things you do because there's no bloody business, and you do worry. So forward, put my hand up, we're in a great position as a small firm, we've plenty of business. Seeing a drop in inquiries, but they're still coming in. And this week's actually been really busy. So we're okay. But if I was doing something else and that market was struggling, I might look at this and think, do you know, this is the panacea. I keep reading all these things in the press about families struggling across generations, from youngsters who are now worrying about their university qualifications exams, up to the sort of more middle-aged people in the 40s, 50s, 60s maybe, who might not have a job at the other side of furlough being terminated. And then obviously our aging population now perhaps might not go into care because the incidence of COVID deaths in care homes is more than domiciliary care situations. So where's the money coming from? And the house is an obvious answer. So that's great. That's great for our markets, great for development. But I think we just need to be a little bit careful about people feeling stressed, under pressure, looking at it as the panacea and diving into the industry. We still need to guide them in. We still need to make sure not only do they get the very most basic of qualifications, but they take it to the next level and continue with the standards and are supported by the industry. And I think collectively, we're in a great position to do that.
Thanks, Simon.
John, sorry, John, it's Chris Brown. Just wanted to add on to what the guys have said there as well. Obviously, some of the networks are moving more into the later life space now, and obviously they've got huge compliance teams behind them. And I think my only concern, like Simon's mentioned as well, is that the quality of advice that's given. So the more people that come into the industry, they haven't got the level of experience, and the quality of advice will be a real concern for me. But there is an opportunity with the networks. I
was going to say, so how do we alleviate that concern? What do we need to do?
Well, as a lender, what we need to do is engage with all the networks to make sure that they understand, our position from a compliance perspective and how the market works. And obviously, they need to engage with their compliance teams need to engage with obviously, spend quality time with their firms, making sure that advisors have got the relevant level of knowledge and experience and qualifications to be able to advise clients correctly. Being part of the council as well is key for me. you know, anybody who's not part of the Equity Release Council really is effectively you know, not taking advice in the relevant place. But I do see that, you know, the advisors coming in that are coming in from the network space are very much ones where potentially it's an opportunity for them, but it's also a danger as well, that they come in and don't give the relevant level of advice.
And I you know, I suppose, you know, making a point from our viewpoint, even as advice-wise and from lenders, and there's a fair amount of support out there with your BDM teams, both Chris's, and, you know, Peter, you do a lot, and, you know, Simon, you're working closely with Solar to support various initiatives there, and we will talk on one very big one at the moment. I'll move on to that soon, on the vulnerability, and that'll lead into the domiciliary care. But it's is there more than we should be doing on that side? Is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah, I think there is, John. I mean, there's, you know, there's more that we can do with the, you know, with all these new people coming into the market. There's lots of, as Sam said, lots of education out there. There's lots of webinars that lenders run. There's lots of events that lenders run previously. Obviously, now they'll all be done remotely. But there's lots of education. But that's the key, really, is education. And, you know, almost, you know, what some of the networks are looking at is buddying systems. So they have, within a network, for example, they've got a number of firms that currently operate in the market. For the newer advisors coming into the market, they're looking at buddying up and offering some support and assistance. So there's lots of opportunities there around education.
So let me go back to, and this, let me open this one up, Chris. So vulnerability, right? Now that is probably for an advisor coming in from a different market, the vulnerability, and, you know, that's a big focus from the FCA at this time, and will be ongoing. So just reading out a statistic. So, you know, and this is one part of the vulnerability issue. The Office for National Statistics, 15th of May 2020, said that COVID-19 accounted for 27.3% of all care home deaths, and of those, 42.5% dementia and Alzheimer's disease is the most common main pre-existing condition. And I'll move on to vulnerability in a moment. But I think the first point for me is this going to lead, and Simon, you may want to answer this one, I think, from your Solar, but please feel free, panel to help. Is this going to lead to a shift in how older people and families choose to be cared for? So, you know, will residential homes be a bit more of a concern for some? I suppose that's one question to ask.
Okay, John, I'll start. Thank you for picking that up. We can only crystal ball gaze and put ourselves in the shoes of children, grandchildren, who are usually together with the parent or grandparent in question, making these big decisions, assuming that parent or grandparent has the wherewithal to join in the conversation, of course. There's a fear out there. There is a fear out there that that care homes are no longer the place where we send our beloved to be cared for, but where we send them to die, quite frankly. And I've had those conversations in just the very last 2 weeks. And I have a case at the moment with a retired reverend. His wife's in care, he visits her every day, and he has to sit outside looking at her through the window. And she has Alzheimer's. She's not really understanding who he is or why he's there, but he still feels that need to do that. And that for him it must be devastating. She stayed at home, just for example, and chosen care to be delivered there, he would still be with her. They'd still be sharing that environment. And I think that will own to people who aren't yet faced with this decision, and will look in future to considering much more deeply about what their care options are. And this is the trick. Most people don't want to have that conversation until they're absolutely faced with it. It's always that need. If you talk to anybody in the care advice sector, they'll tell you it's an at-need conversation. And by the time it gets to the advisor, whether it's an equity release advisor looking for some money, or a solid care fees advisor or solicitor on the legals, it's often too late. Decisions are being forced upon them, money's run dry. And I think what advisors need to do is, to use the phrase I think you've used in your seminar today, is to upskill. Advisors need to become much more proficient and much bolder at having better conversations surrounding the property and how it can be used. So rather than following just the format of the Equity Release Council checklist for advisors on have you considered the alternative of moving home, which goes on to say now or in the future, etc. You expand upon it and you become skilled and proficient at painting scenarios with your clients and be bold enough to say, if you needed care, where would you prefer that to be delivered from what you know today? And have those conversations. And not only that will that open it up, but as an advisor will help you understand better the sort of products you're looking for that might best meet your client's needs now, but also facilitate that potential change in circumstances.
Okay, and this taking that question on and just opening it up.
John,
Sorry,
John,
yeah, go on,
I
please.
just really want to kind of bring everything that's been said in the last 5 minutes, I think, kind of join the circle round. And from what I've been hearing people and what I firmly believe about, we've mentioned how we're going to make sure that advisors, you know, are skilled enough to advise in this marketplace so the right outcomes are achieved. How are we going to make sure that advisors spend the right time in the most important areas when advising? And I think it all really comes down to, and Simon, you know, touched on it when he said, you know, when he first started, he'd go in a magazine, he'd have to look at what the rates were. They may be out of date. And I think it all comes back to the use of technology. And I remember having a few years ago, having conversations with some advisors who were worried that the use of technology would allow people to come into this marketplace and kind of not be specialists, but it would do their job for them. I think the piece that I want to put is, especially what a lot of firms out there doing, is making the technology easy so you can spend your time now in the right areas rather than spending a lot of time having to go away, do research, having to go and collect information. I think what we want to do is make sure that we give advisors the time so that there's still that element of specialism and bespoke nature in what we offer. And by having a technology solution, but then having a skilled and qualified advisor who knows how to have conversations with clients, if you harness those two together, I think that's where we're really going to have the best customer journeys and customer outcomes for years to come. That's what our industry really needs to get to. You know, cutting down the time we're doing the research. You know, the API links. We're somewhere behind the mortgage world, but we're catching up at full speed ahead. Making sure that, you know, advisors don't have to duplicate work will mean that quality time with that client, they can spend more doing that rather than stuff that maybe in the past has taken a lot of time.
So and Chris, that's a really good point. And you know, one of the questions I was going to mention was about technology, and obviously advice-wise, that's a big part of the ambition, is to, you know, launching something that's very intuitive and simple to use. And sorry, this, you know, as host, I'm not here to be flogging this to everybody, but that's something for, I'm sure if you're registered, you know that. Technology-wise, and that's the linking and the API thing's important. So how, from a lender viewpoint, how do you see technology driving the market, or being one of the drivers of taking the market forward then? And I think you've answered it half there anyway. And Chris or anybody else, please feel free to answer. So how much, I suppose, are lenders in general embracing technology to drive the advice and industry forward?
Hi John, it's Chris Brown here. I came into this industry a couple of years ago from a tech company. I actually worked for Mortgage Brain. I was quite surprised how, if I'm honest, how backward the technology was that was being used. You know, the fact that you've got to generally go to a lender's website to get a KFI or a lender's portal, as opposed to being able to obtain one from a sourcing engine that you've done all your research on, quite surprised me. And then obviously there's still some lenders in the market that are not adopting technology for the processing side of cases. And I think, you know, if we're going to, we can certainly speed up the processing element of cases, you know, through from an advisor, so the advisor's journey and then the customer's ultimate journey can be made quicker through using technology. It doesn't take away the fact that customers still need that specialist advice. I certainly still believe that needs to be there up front, but we can make things a little bit easier and a little bit more streamlined for customers. And my company Mortgage Men have just launched in the mainstream market direct, advisors can go straight through processing all the way into a lender's back office system.
Yeah.
And I know Pure are very good at that they're ahead of the game, and obviously More to Life are, but I think there is some way to go yet, if I'm honest, in terms of making this process much more quicker and streamlined. And part of the issue is legacy systems. It's all about having old systems that process cases in the background, which don't work or configure, or it's too difficult or too expensive to configure with some of the new platforms that are around at the front end process. So for me, I think we've still got a fair way to go in terms of that. But all credit to Chris and the team at Pure and AdviseWise with the sourcing, because they're making some good progress there.
Excellent.
John, just coming there, I think the real next part is how we can. So we're using the tech from an application point of view, but I think the company that gets it right is how they help advisors engage with their clients. And I think that's a real next step change that we need to see in the technology is the advent of technology that helps us shout about how great our industry are. I don't know what the answer is there, but I think that's where we really need to start engaging in this marketplace, is make the processes better for advisors and then really get them to engaging with their clients. We do bits at Pure in terms of we help with them building their own websites, we give them templates, etc. But I think in the coming years, that's where the companies that are going to see the big wins, is how you use technology to really engage with that customer and how you streamline your processes to keep a contract strategy with them, because the firms that have been successful in these marketplaces are the ones that have used technology to make sure aware of what the options are available.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
John, if I can just add in here, even from this old-fashioned solicitor's viewpoint, the need for technological advancements has been huge, and I think the majority of the solicitors in the market, the smaller firms, haven't really made those leaps. But I think the lockdown has shown to us all. I've always spent all of my years in envy of GW, the other panel solicitor at AdviseWise. Shameless plug for GW there. I've always looked to them as leading the way in technology, and we've always aimed to be at their level. And in all aspects of what we do now as solicitors, the old-fashioned way of particularly seeing the clients in the office or through a client walking through the door, long since strong. And I think all the professionals in the sector need to step forward. And I think us solicitors are always the most reluctant to do that. And I think any solicitor in the market now really has to grasp and spend some money on IT to progress and to help the clients out in this period, the benefit of technology for the clients.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Right, I'll ask a few of the questions. I did say 45 minutes, but if everybody's okay, I'd like to continue for 5 or 10 if you can all stay with us. I'm assuming we won't get locked out by Zoom. I think we're okay on that one. But let me just put this to the panel from Alistair Shields. Other than a potential downward property price correction, post-COVID-19, where do we see the largest fallout occurring? Now, we've talked a lot about the advice side and needing more advisors. So any other areas that you think that could be a fallout bar property correction, obviously?
I think for me, our market always kind of gets a ripple effect from what happens in the residential mortgage market. So my answer would be whatever the fallout is from the residential mortgage market, we will probably have the impact of that. So the fallout might be a positive, is that a lot of people now are faced with the fact that their mortgage payments are no longer affordable. Or it could be that a lot of mortgage lenders, I know there was some talk in the press a few weeks ago about extending mortgage holidays for up to a year, which may well mean that then pushes the demand for equity to further down that line because people don't need to repay their mortgages. But I would say a lot, generally, if you look at the equities market, certainly since, I've been in that years, as always, we've had to pick up the pieces from the residential mortgage side in a lot of circumstances when the residential mortgage side has failed or let customers down. We're the ones where they've had to come to. We've hopefully in a lot of cases been able to give them the solutions. So I think, we'll still be there to offer that. It'll just be kind of a wait and see what happens there.
Fabulous. Question from Kevin Hull. After COVID, the changes made by Equities Council, should they now be for an extended period? I think, Peter, you've answered that. Kevin, I think, Peter, you'd agree the answer is no. That's quite...
I think one thing I would say is we have been sounded out by the council as to when they should be listed, when they should actually be lifted.
Yes, timing is of the
And I
essence.
think the danger is, I think the smaller law firms won't actually be operational probably until August, September. So as reluctant as I am to encourage the non-legal face-to-face, I think we need to remain for a while yet. And certainly I have a lady stuck in Italy who I shall be operating my first non-legal face-to-face on. So I need them to keep going for a while. So I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't know who wants this this one. Gary Klein. Why can't you do a physical survey on an empty property? I'm not going to pick anybody for that one. So, anybody got the answer to that?
To be honest, John, I completely agree with Gary. I don't see why we can't do one. I'm sure I read a couple of weeks ago whereby a valuer had gone into the estate agents, picked the key up and went and carried out a physical valuation because the property was empty. So there's no risk. There's only risk with the valuer going into the estate agents and picking the keys up. And as long as there's social distancing and the relevant, steps are taken, I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah. Okay.
I suppose it's some of the requirements for the valuer to obviously have the loft open, the windows open, all that sort of thing, certain access to various elements of property. That might be an issue, but I don't particularly, from a personal perspective, see why it should be. And
I think, it was, from my viewpoint, I think it was an initial lockdown where it was blanket. So, and I think we will see, as we are seeing the loosening, that will probably the same thing, Gary, with things like valuations, that will change. But, yeah, I think, John, RICS have given clear guidance, haven't they, in terms of valuations, what's required of their valuers, the valuer, the partner firms or member firms, I should say. So that, they've got clear guidance in what steps they should be taking. Yeah. So I think, I don't think we'll see that going forward, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and just to pick up, I know in the chat box, Mark Rumley's made a point, and I completely agree with him. It's sometimes that we get, our focus is just all about that client, and absolutely that's the job of a good advisor. However, it's not just the surveyor going to that property; it's travelling to get there, going to a petrol station, and surveyors as a breed are extremely cautious in what they do. That's why they're good surveyors at assessing risk. And I think for a lot of them, ultimately, the surveyor firms deemed that absolutely that was putting their staff at risk. And so that actually, them travelling, going, being in contact with people, they didn't want that at all. And they felt that was obviously covering government guidelines. As we've now said, physical valuations are returning. So just kind of an update, if I may, John, just on where Pure's position is. Because I think there's a lot of, I won't say fake news, but different mixed messages going out in the industry. So Pure stance is that we'll be returning physical valuations as of today on our classic range, and that's been done by Countrywide. Just so everyone's aware that the Countrywide have done a couple of test cases. So if any of your clients have had a call from a surveyor, they did a couple of test cases just to make sure the processes were correct. Again, a bit of another plea from me is if the feedback that we're receiving at this initial stage is if all advisors can just at least update the clients, and if it is one where they know it is going to be returning to a physical valuation, just set the client's expectations. When the appointments are being booked by the surveying firms, they are running through kind of a call script explaining what will happen and giving them comfort and peace of mind that safety is at the heart of what we're trying to do. What Countrywide have also offered us is also the facility to actually do just an external inspection. So on our classic range, it will default initially to still do a desktop valuation. If that's not possible for whatever reason, the surveyor then upgrades that to a physical valuation. And then if the client then says, for any reason that they're not comfortable with that, Countrywide are offering as a third option where they will just do an external inspection where they'll drive to the property, take it from the outside, have a look through the window. So we have got those options available. So that's on our classic range, and as I say, we'll be starting, if not has already started this morning. On our two other further funding lines, these are going to come back to the marketplace extremely early next week, probably Tuesday, but that's not confirmed yet. And the process we're taking with those is our funder wants to go straight back to physical valuations. The good news there is that all the criteria that came with a desktop valuation is now being removed if a physical valuation can be done. So again, in this process, it will be defaults to a physical valuation. If for any reason that can't be done, then the surveyor will then pass it on to a remote valuation, and then that will be offset against our remote valuation criteria. So things will get moving. I think it will be a couple of weeks before we get back to parity. And also just something that I found out only this morning, just for advisors to be aware of, is that I think some of the surveyor firms have got two separate teams that book these appointments and deal with pipeline cases and new business. So you may well see some odd occurrences where a new business case that you submit may, in some circumstances, get dealt with quicker than a pipeline case. And as advisors, you might be wondering how that happens. And I'm understood that generally it might not happen, but there could be circumstances where it's a different team dealing with different cases. So if that does happen, I just wanted to bring that to the attention of everyone on here today as well.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Right, final two questions, and I know we've gone over time, so appreciate you all staying with us, and panelists likewise. John Cobbold, this could be friendly. Do you see a move to cherry picking? This is properties now, so this is from perhaps a funder/lender viewpoint, and this is open. And do we see age restricted coming back into the market? I suppose that links in more to housing stock, Simon, and you know, is that relevant to maybe requirements going forward, and will that change? So sorry, there's two questions there. So first one, Chris Flowers, as you're on still on camera, is there or will there be cherry picking of properties? I suppose that's the.
I think I wouldn't like to use the word cherry picking, but managing risk.
Yeah,
is probably the phrase I would go. Is that I've touched upon a few times now? Then that funders, are all about managing their risk.
Well, and risk profile, isn't it? So, yeah.
And properties that they think, or profiles that they think will be more applicable to sensitive to property price changes, then obviously they won't be keen to look at those. But yeah, I think whilst there isn't cherry picking, a funder will always like to take a viewpoint on properties. I think if the question is, will criteria get tighter, then I don't think so. I think once we're out of this, I think the only thing that we've seen, and Chris Brown can probably shed some more light on it, because obviously one family were in the high LTV spaces. I think the only thing that we will see until we can see where the property market recovers to, even if it falls at all, is that the high LTV level properties will take a hit. But in terms of criteria, I think that's still something that we're absolutely comfortable with, and we won't be trying to cherry pick.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I think very quickly, because I'm conscious of time, I would agree with Chris there. To be fair, I don't think that we'll see some cherry picking. Where we remain committed to the higher LTV bracket. In fact, we're very close to, or we were very close pre-COVID to launching another tranche in the super LTV market. So that's key for us. Yeah, I think that's it really. I think we'll remain committed and we won't be cherry picking. And there's no planned criteria changes that will affect any of the lending that we do or the properties.
Good, that's good to hear. I think that'll probably wrap it up. There probably are other questions, but we've tried to answer as many as we can there within the time. Thank you very much for everybody who's listened in and stayed with us. And apologies, initially we didn't have the video, but we got you these beautiful people in the end. That's the main thing. Thank you very much, everybody, and panelists likewise. Thank you very much for your time. It's been really useful, and hopefully it's been useful for the audience. All I'd say is our ultimate, we've done a penultimate today, our ultimate next week, in conjunction with we are doing a session on vulnerability So please do come along, and there will be, anybody registered for that will be able to access a vulnerability toolkit. So please join us next week. We will be getting out the invites over the next day or two. But once again, thank you, audience, and thank you, panelists.